Alright, so for this last replay, I wanted to showcase a game that was a little bit more high power. And one thing I will say that I'm not entirely proud of is that I did get a little bit upset this game just because a guy was playing Orvar. He cloned his Ristic study, and then when people would say, "Yeah, I'm paying for all your Ristic studies," or "I've paid for Ristic study," he, for whatever reason, and this could be because of a language barrier too. Um, uh, he for whatever reason would be like, "Did you pay? Are you sure you paid?" Um, and then he would be like, "You need to pay one more," and I'd be like, "Dude, like, can you do your math properly? Because the rest of us have seen that this guy has paid for your Ristic studies." Um, and as you can see here, the mod is saying that he has kind of a history of issues as well. But it is a game that I did end up winning, and so it's not entirely fair for me uh, I guess, have gotten upset over the Orvar player just because Orvar was doing what Orvar does. And um, I guess I was more annoyed by the fact that he was constantly asking, like, do you pay for my Ristic studies? And we were like, yes, we already told you we paid. But anyway, I'm not going to get deep into that. So obviously in the replays you can see people's hands, but when we're playing, you can't. So I was able to win the die roll finally in this game, and I kept this hand uh, because it technically meets our mulligan criteria. Yes, we have nothing to actually clamp with the skull clamp, but considering our deck is over 1/3 or 1/3 of the deck is creatures, and that we've got fetch lands to filter out the lands in the deck, we should be hitting uh, creatures at some point. And if not, then, we just lay low a little bit. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit until they finish resolving their mulligans here. But essentially, I went turn one with Foothills, and the idea was that I was going, since I didn't have like a turn two, like 2 mana play anyway, I felt like going turn one into Plateau and then playing the Skull Clamp honestly didn't matter that much compared to just getting a Sacred Foundry at the end of this guy's turn, which I do, and then just playing the Skull Clamp on turn two, and then playing another land just because we've got mostly we've got 3 1-cost cards in hand, and then we had the Martyr's Cause. Drawing Dockside was really good here. Anytime I draw a Dockside, I'm looking at what sort of artifacts and enchantments the other players might possibly play. I figured Orvar would have some. So yeah, our Skull Clamp got Mental Misstep, which is a really good play from Orvar. I think Mental Misstep is a card that should be run more in competitive, not just competitive Commander. It is run in competitive Commander, but I mean just in Commander in general. There's a lot of really strong 1-cost cards like Swords of Plowshares, 1-cost tutors, and other things that you might just want a Mental Misstep. And so if you're playing blue, I think Mental Misstep is a really good card. But essentially, I'm going to speed this up because there was a little bit where he was just kind of like AFK, or this guy was AFK over here. And so my logic of, what do I do with this hand is I really need to see some more creatures. And I think at some point I Enlightened Tutor for an Altar Dementia, but since we lost our Skull Clamp, the next best sack outlet in the deck is Altar Dementia, which is also used in our combo wins. And I also mentioned somewhere in the primer that you have to get the Altar of Dementia at some point, because even with the Skull Clamp, even with a lot of card draw, we are still a recursion deck, and so if our graveyard is not stocked, or if we don't have a way to stock our graveyard, or at least sacrifice our creatures after they've been turned into spirits, like Hofri turns them into spirits, but also gives them +1/+1 and trample and haste. And that +1/+1 is enough to push it out of Skull Clamp range. So we can't rely on Skull Clamp solely as the sack outlet anymore. Yeah, and so here I believe all I do is just play the land, and I think I just pass here. Now my hand does get forced because he's going to play the Ristic Study, and I'm going to respond to the Ristic Study by playing the Enlightened Tutor to grab the altar, but if you look at the primer, the first thing is essentially go get Skull Clamp, and we did that. We had that in opening hand. Of course, our Skull Clamp got put in the graveyard. But the next thing is to get the Altar of Dementia, because even though Altar of Dementia doesn't draw us cards, we have enough recursion in the deck so that we want the Altar because it can stalk our graveyard. And the Altar also doubles as a piece in a kill combo. So you'll see that. I fetch for the Altar of Dementia here, put it on top. Let's go ahead and speed this up. The Rhys player does get a little bit crazy. Is, obviously he's going to go wide. He's got the coat of arms in hand. He does at some point get this thing to turn into basically a Gaia's Cradle, and then he's got a kill card in hand as well. And so that turn we saw the Orvar player play Sol Ring and then play Orvar. The Rhys player is getting value off Oracle of Moldiah. The Rhys player does end up going pretty wide here. Meanwhile, it's interesting because our board is, to many players, besides the fact that Hofri is like not really played by anybody. This guy again has less than 1,800 decks on EDH Rec as of this video, which is like less than 1% of all commander decks. Even though we have a piece that is commonly used in infinite combos, we probably look like the weakest at the table. Either that or like Liesa, but we definitely don't look particularly threatening here with Altar and empty board, and that's just part of what makes it kind of deceptive here. Is that there's no pressure on us. Now, if we had Hofri playing creatures, then in those games, especially if you watch some of the other replays, there is a lot of pressure on us. But in this game, we're just staying with empty board and Altar of Dementia, and people are chilling, and they're more worried about the Orvar player with the Rhystic Study, and that's why the Rhys player pretty much swings at people other than us. So here he can't really swing into Orvar, but he swings into the Liesa player. So I'm going to go ahead and speed up a little bit. Just because, again, the damage here is kind of irrelevant in many ways. He plays the Growing Rites, which will trigger during his end step to basically give him a Gaia's Cradle. But the damage dealt here is irrelevant just because no one actually kills each other just through like combat in this game. So let's go ahead and speed it up. So he adds Eladamri, Lord of Leaves, which gives Elves Forest Walk, basically Shroud. He's got the Imperious, perfect. He has Parallel Lives on top. I attempted Swords at the end of turn. Unfortunately, he drew enough cards off of the Rhystic Study for this guy, and the fact that I couldn't pay for the Swords, that he's able to go ahead and start doing Orvar things. Clones the island, and really I don't think there's any other way about it. I need to get the counter spells out of his hand, and in the case that he doesn't have a way to protect Orvar, then hosing Orvar really slows him down. And the upside of all this is that I'm pretty sure that if the Rhys player had actually gotten to cast Crater Hoof Behemoth, I don't think he would have had the board to take out all of us at once in a single attack. He probably would have. Well, I don't know. It depends on how you play. With Coat of Arms, then for sure. But I imagine at some point he was going to play the Coat of Arms and then probably drop one of us to very low health. But here I just do another thing. I play the Ancient Tomb, and then I just drop Hofri, and then pass. Now, this may not seem like we're doing much here, but we have a gamble. We have essentially near infinite mana with Dockside, and we have a sack outlet. A backup sack outlet. Now this backup sack outlet is not particularly useful when we have the best sack outlet in our deck already in play. But the other two pieces are going to be pivotal. And so here we're going to see him get the Whim of Volrath, which is an infamous card with Orvar used in many of the infinite combos that Orvar has. And he's basically going to be able to duplicate his Rhystic Studies, and this is where things get a little bit insane. Orvar is going to draw a huge number of cards in his deck, or from his deck over the course of this game. So he's first going to copy the Cloud Post, So now his cloud posts tap for 2 each, and then he is essentially going to use the whim again, since he's able to play with buyback, to just clone Rhystic Study. So yeah, here he's going to play the whim again, make another copy of Rhystic Study, and this is where things get a little nuts for the Orvar player in terms of how much he's drawing. So for me, my line that I am thinking here is that I'm going to cast Dockside. I'm going to gamble to grab the Sun Titan. If the Sun Titan resolves, I can get Skull Clamp back, and then I think you know from watching the other 2 replays that this deck goes nuts with Skull Clamp and a Sack Outlet. So I will demonstrate that the full loop of what I do on my turn, because even though we are completely unassuming at this point, I mean, look at what the other players have. Maybe Liesa isn't particularly dangerous in terms of what they have going on, but Rhys is going wide pretty fast. Again, if they played their coat of arms, they end up playing Parallel Lives and trying to set up for probably a coat of arms the following turn and then a Crater Hoof. But the thing is, none of these players are actually going to get another turn, because even though it looks like I've got nothing going on except my commander and then a sack outlet, I am going to win the game on my turn. Now, I don't know that currently. I simply know I'm going to gamble, try to get the Sun Titan, use Sun Titan with Skull Clamp to start drawing cards. But with the amount of digging that we can do with Altar of Dementia and a Skull Clamp, we can pretty much win the game on the spot. And I'm going to demonstrate that once it gets over to my turn. So let's go ahead and speed this up, because he plays Parallel Lives. He's going to... yeah, and this part I get a little bit upset, because he's like, you need to pay 1 more for your Rhystic Studies, and I'm like, dude, he paid 6 mana for Parallel Lives. Like come on, like, yeah. But anyway, I do get annoyed when people play Orvar and make clones of Rhystic Study, and then someone's like, okay, I'm gonna float 10 mana, I'm gonna pay 6 to play this 4 mana card, and then someone's like, oh, but you need to pay more. And it's like, no, actually, you need to learn to do math. So here I'm floating 1. I play the dock side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that's going to create 6 treasures. And part of the reason why I didn't pay is because I didn't know how much mana I was going to need throughout the turn. And so the dock side I played simply because I did not want to discard it for any reason because of gamble. Like, if I gamble and I have to discard the dock side, it kind of kills the whole turn for me, especially because I'm gambling for the Sun Titan. And the whole reason to get Sun Titan is because, 1, it gets back the Skull Clamp, and 2, it's used for a kill combo. So it serves dual purpose in this list. So the dock side came in, made 6 treasures, and now I gamble, and this is a 1 in 3 chance to miss, because the gamble is going to get the Sun Titan, and obviously I still have to discard a card from hand, and so it's very possible that I would have ended up discarding the Sun Titan, which really would have been unfortunate, and I think I'm not sure what I would have done if I had to discard the Sun Titan. But in situations like this, where someone's got double heuristic study and this guy's going wide, and you're pretty sure they could just drop a Crater Hoof and like kill the table, you have to go for it, right? And so I don't know if you saw that, but I fetched this, or I tutored the Sun Titan, and then you have to randomly discard a card. The way we do on here is we randomly reveal a card from our hand, and it chose the Martyr's Cause. I would have been fine with it hitting Grasp of Fate as well. Again, it's like 33% chance that we miss here, but luckily we didn't hit our Sun Titan. So here the plan is to start getting value. So we've got our 1 floating, and we remove 5 tokens. We cast the Sun Titan. We say we're not paying. Again, he can draw, but he's tapped out. He's got to have like free spells or something to start countering my stuff, and most of my stuff is creatures, not non-creatures. So yeah, so now we have the Skull Clamp, and we equip the Skull Clamp to dockside, and then we sack the dockside to altar, and we choose to mill ourselves because, again, we have Sun Titan, and so in the worst case scenario, we can sacrifice the Sun Titan altar to return, or to make another clone of Sun Titan with Hofri, which would return something. So that hit Stoneforge Mystic and the Spawning Pit. Drew his 2 cards off Skull Clamp, made a copy of Dockside Extortionist with the Hofri, which got us another 6 treasures. Um, and then here we end up just doing the same thing, I believe. Actually, no, I think what we do is we cast the Wall of Omens just to draw, and then we skull clamp the Wall of Omens. Maybe not. It looks like I am skull clamping the Dockside here. I don't think the order matters too much. Yeah, so we do hit another combo piece, or another sack outlet in a potential combo piece. We draw 2 cards. This lets us hit our land drop for the turn. And then the Pearl Medallion essentially reduces almost everything in this deck by 1, which is relevant enough for us to cast it before we start looping again. Yeah, so here I remove 2 treasures, play the Pearl Medallion. Again, I don't pay for any of this because I mean, we have to pretty much go off and win this turn, which we do. So Pearl Medallion, and then we can cast the Wall of Omens for 1. Again, not paying. Wall of Omens is going to draw us a card, which draws us Pulse Mage Advocate. Now, Pulse Mage Advocate is what's going to enable us to loop Dockside again, because, and it's fortunate that we played, those spells that we did in previous turns, such as the Swords of Plowshares, and that he mental misstepped us, because everyone's graveyard here except for ours is empty, and so the only one that we can actually target for this is the Orvar player. Now, if you're watching this, you may be wondering, how do we give the Pulse Mage Advocate haste? Well, Hofri gives Spirit Tokens, Trample, and haste. So we simply play the Pulse Mage Advocate, we sack it to altar, which makes a Spirit Token copy that has haste, and then we target the Orvar player. And so here, I'm trying to think here. I remove, right, I believe no, okay. Yeah, I just cast the Pulse Mage Advocate for 2, reduced by 1 because of the Pearl Medallion. Again, the Pearl Medallion reduces almost everything in this deck by 1, which is partly why we run it. Pulse Mage Advocate comes in. Then we target ourselves. We hit 7's Reclamation, which is huge, because 7's can bring back Goblin Bombardment if needed, and we do use it later, because Infinite Mill is actually not enough to kill the Orvar player, which I will show a little bit later once we actually get to it. So here we tap the Pulse Mage Advocate with haste, and I just picked pretty much everything but Solve the Equation, but I probably should have picked Solve the Equation here instead of giving him Mental Misstep. But there weren't really good choices here for the Pulse Mage Advocate. I'll speed it up a little bit. Obviously, we target Dockside, and so we've essentially made 12 treasure tokens this turn Dockside. Bringing it back with Pulse Mage is going to allow us to make another 12, and so we will have made 24 tokens total this turn, which is huge because now we Skull Clamp the Wall of Omens. We sack it to the altar dimension. Essentially, we're just going to keep digging in the deck until we find something that we actually want to bring back with the 7's Reclamation. So here we draw off the Skull Clamp. We make a Spirit Token copy of Wall of Omens. We draw another card, which is Elish Norn. So again, nothing, I mean, decent cards, but not particularly great for what we're trying to do, which is win right now. And so we Skull Clamp again. The Wall of Omens, and so here actually is enough to combo. If you have read the primer, you don't actually need Sun Titan. Hofri, Miss Moon Griffin, and Alter Dementia is also an infinite combo, infinite mill, or we could have played 7's, brought back the Goblin Bombardment, and done infinite damage. But I decided to go ahead and keep going. So we are going to equip the Skull Clamp onto the Dockside, sacrifice it to the altar in order to make 6 more treasures when we get a Dockside clone from Hofri. So we hit 2 more cards, we sacked it, drew 2 cards, and here we go, we draw into a Gift of Immortality, which goes infinite with the Sun Titan. And so if you'll notice here that if he had counter spells that he could play, like if he had a Fierce Guardianship or something like that, to counter our Gift of Immortality. Let's say he had a way to counter any number of non-creature spells that we played. Then we simply play the Mistmoon Griffin and we can still infinite combo him. So we had a lot of redundancy here in the number of ways we could have won after we dug essentially 40 cards deep. So here, I play this. I'm asking, does it resolve? He thinks for a little bit. I'll speed this up because he's got 23 cards in hand. He says okay, and then I simply link the commanderspellbook.com combo. I mill them out. These guys get milled out. He reveals that he has Nexus of Fate, which if it's put in the graveyard from anywhere, it gets put back into his library. So I say okay. So then, I say, all right, well, if you have a way to always have Nexus of Fate in the library, then we have to cast 7th Reclamation from the graveyard with Flashback. We do have Pyroblast to counter one counterspell, in case he did have a Fierce Guardianship. But it looks like he, with no mana floating, or no mana available, he didn't have any way to counter this, and so the targets here obviously were Goblin Bombardment, because we can't infinitely mill him, but we can infinitely damage him with this combo. And then the other one was getting the Direfleet Daredevil, because with his whole deck in the graveyard, I mean, there's going to be a free counterspell in there somewhere, and of course we find it. We find that there is a Fierce Guardianship in his graveyard, so that's what we end up exiling with the Direfleet Daredevil, which allows us to cast it this turn, just in case we need to protect this combo somehow, and our Pyroblast wasn't enough. Of course, he probably would have countered the 7th Reclamation if he had a way to counter it, but I just did this just to be safe. And then from here, we simply do the combo again with Sun Titan to do infinite damage with Goblin Bombardment, and that kills him. And so yeah, that's a demonstration of us going from essentially Altar Dementia and Hofri Ghostforge and 3 cards in hand to digging about 30 cards into our deck, making 24 treasure tokens in a turn, and infinite combo killing the table in 2 different ways. And as you saw, and as I mentioned, we technically had a 4th way to combo kill the table with the Mistmoon Griffin in our hand, in case they had a way to stop non-creatures. And honestly, I don't think it would have mattered. We didn't necessarily need to go for Goblin Bombardment here, because we get priority between each of the phases. And so on his upkeep, actually no, it wouldn't have mattered, because you can't actually mill right before he draws. Technically the trigger, yeah, so this wouldn't have worked. I think we had to go for the way that we won. In cases where it's a one-time effect, like if he's got a land that he can tap to put a card from his graveyard back on top of his library, you can actually mill him again before he moves to his draw step. And I think that actually happens in one of the previous games I'd shown. But in this case, we had to actually find another way to infinite combo him, and we did. So yeah, that is just another demonstration of how this deck goes from unassuming to just, going crazy to a win in essentially a single turn. And of course, if we didn't do it, either the Rhys player or the Orvar player was going to go off and probably end up winning on their turn. So yeah, gotta be fast, gotta be unassuming, gotta be subtle. So, and this video will conclude my Hofri series. I may post more Hofri videos in the future if people ask about them, want to see Hofri in some more demonstration games, but I think these 3 will be sufficient. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to post below, and yeah, I'll get to them whenever I have time. Thanks for watching.